So if we start building in the practice where we put some examples, we show them on the board, or sometimes I will take examples and I'll put them on a document and I'll make one for each group, and then they work together to highlight what was done well, what needs to be fixed, how to develop it. Then students start to understand what is okay in online discussions for a class and what isn't okay. So it just takes practice, and the more we can have them look at their writing online and evaluate it, critique it, talk about it, the better it gets more quickly. Okay, the third step. The third step is really about us as teachers and what we can do to try to make the discussions a little bit more dynamic. And this is really about how do we design discussion questions that are going to get students interested and excited. Because I have kids who, they don't do their homework all the time. They probably log in to Schoology, they look at the question, and then if the question looks interesting, they do their homework. If the question doesn't look interesting, they shut the computer off and they don't do their homework. So what can I do as a teacher to make them want to answer the question? Okay, I'm going to start. So you remember the picture of my baby when she was first born, very young? This is her now. So all she does is ask me questions all the time. A lot of the questions I cannot answer, right? But they're really interesting questions. And she's a constant reminder that questions and asking questions is a creative act of intelligence. So we as teachers shouldn't be afraid to ask questions that we don't know the answers to, that there might be many different answers to that question. And so to think about that as we're going through and designing our questions. So I'm going to share with you some things that I have learned by writing questions that were not very good, and then seeing what students responded to and what they didn't respond to. And so these are just tips to help you so that your first questions are stronger than my first questions were. Okay. So you guys noticed that when you logged into Schoology, the first thing you saw was the topic, right? Time Machine Icebreaker. That was the title. They had to click the title to see the rest. So if my title is Chapter 3 question, do I want to click on that? Do I want to answer it? Not really, right? So the first thing we can do is start with a catchy title, something that's interesting, something that piques their excitement, right? So really work on those interesting titles. The second thing that we can do is you'll notice I had a picture. It was loosely related to the Time Machine Icebreaker, but it didn't matter because as soon as you open the picture or open the discussion, you had something pretty to look at. And our students, more and more, are very visual. They interact with the world in very visual ways. Even since I started using technology, my kids aren't on Facebook. They're not like hanging out on Facebook with their friends. They're sharing pictures on Instagram. They're sharing videos on Vine. They are very visual. And if we as teachers can leverage that, if we can use it, we can get them excited. So you'll notice, as we go through this, I never create questions that are just words. Because students, I'm an English teacher, so this is hard for me to admit, they don't love words the way I love words, right? So a bunch of words doesn't look exciting. So I'm going to dress up my words with something that is interesting to look at. So I link to videos, I put pictures, anything that I can use. So this example, I was teaching Maya Angelou's I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings, which is one of my favorite books to teach. And so I often will embed video of Dr. Angelou in interviews or, speaking because she has such a powerful voice, right? And I want kids to see that. So I have a video clip in this example. And then I think it's really important to remember, we don't want to ask the same questions all the time. If every time a student logs in, it's just an analytical question about literature, it's not as exciting. So instead, maybe thinking about having a debate in your online discussion. So present them with a topic, ask them to choose a side. Maybe it is analysis about a topic. Maybe you're asking them to research something and then write about it. So think outside the box and try to keep your questions varied. Maybe give them different options so they have like multiple choices of things they can focus on, because that variety will keep them more interested in coming back. Because my teenagers at 9th and 10th grade, they get bored very easily. And so the more I can keep it interesting for them, the better. I also always recommend that teachers layer the questions. And what I mean by that is instead of asking just one question, especially if it's a challenging topic, ask a couple different questions so that there's more than one way for a student to get into the conversation. Because if I ask one question and the student doesn't understand it, then all of a sudden they don't really have anything to add to the conversation. So I want to ask a couple different kinds of questions about the same topic and allow them different ways to get in, different avenues to get into the conversation. And this is a very easy way to differentiate also. So I want to show you this example. So after watching this video, I asked my students 3 questions. The first question is, do you agree with Angelou's statement that the only way we as a society will be free from the, quote, blight of ignorance is if we read and learn? I have second language learners. I have students who struggle as readers. If that's all I ask, they will get to this phrase, blight of ignorance. They'll say, I don't know. I don't know how to answer this question. I don't even know what that means. So they would not have a way to contribute. So then I have a second question that's a little bit easier for them. Do you agree that reading and knowledge and education are essential to respecting differences and forming cross-cultural, cross-racial friendships? That one's a little easier to understand. Okay, maybe I can answer that question. For those kids who are really struggling, the third question asks them to connect their life experience to the topic. So that question is hopefully the one that anybody can answer. So it says, what experiences in your life have caused you to be open-minded? So for the kids who are really strong, they can take that first question. They can go into a lot of depth. But for those kids who are really struggling, they also have a way to offer something of value and have a voice in this conversation because they all have life experience they can draw on. So when you're designing a question, think catchy, interesting title. Think different kinds of questions. Think about what kind of media can you embed or can you link to. And think about, how do I design questions that invite everyone to be part of the conversation and differentiate for different levels? And I tell my kids, you don't have to answer every question. That's not the requirement. I want quality in the response, but you don't have to answer every single one. And that's a choice I've made, so you have to kind of decide where you fall on that. Is that the question? Okay. So moving forward in my own practice, I got better at designing questions. I asked for a lot of feedback from my students. What are you enjoying? What do you not enjoy? And then I started looking at their participation. So for every discussion question, they have to respond to my question. They have to post a response. And they have to reply to 2 people, at least 2 people. Because if they're just answering my question, that's just like submitting homework online. The beauty of online discussions is in those interactions between the students. So I want them to reply. But in the beginning, I realized they weren't replying as much as I had asked them to. And I thought, are they struggling? Do they not know how to reply to each other? What's happening? And so I said to one of my classes, I said, you know, you're not meeting the requirements for replies. What's happening? What are you struggling with? And their answer, I forgot we had to do that. So then I realized in every single discussion question, I also have to include directions for their participation. So all of my discussion questions, you probably noticed it on the icebreaker, they end with something like this. So I have the question, and then I skip a line, and I say, once you've posted your response, read the responses posted by your peers and reply thoughtfully to at least 2 other members of the class. Compliment strong points made, ask questions, build on ideas shared, respectfully disagree, or offer different perspectives. And what I am doing with that statement is 3 things. 1, I am reminding them, I am signaling that after they answer the question, their job's not over. They still have to reply to peers. I'm telling them what the requirement is, at least 2 other members of the class, and you can decide what works for you. And lastly, I'm reminding them of strategies that they can use, compliments, questions, building on ideas, respectfully disagreeing, the strategies they can use to reply to one another. So that's really important as well, and something that I just didn't realize I was neglecting until I asked my students, like, why aren't you doing this? And I realized it's very simple. They just forgot, okay? So as the year progressed, what amazes me is as you go through this process with students, it doesn't happen overnight. But To Kill a Mockingbird was my first book of the year last year. And we started the first week online discussions. They did icebreakers for about a week and a half, only icebreakers, and then we talked about them. And then I started putting in discussion questions. And my students have to do 1 discussion question every other night for me. So they have basically 2 nights. 1 night to post a response, and the next night to reply to their peers. And over the course of, I want to say, this was about 4.5 weeks into the school year, all of a sudden, look at what kids are doing. Their responses, I did not tell them they had to have a word length. I tell them very clearly, I want quality, I don't need quantity. But they start to own this space. They start to feel confident sharing their ideas, dialoguing back and forth with each other. And I like Schoology because you can do a couple things with Schoology. 1, I can decide if my kids can see everybody's post before they respond. And for some questions, I want them to read each other's idea. If they're struggling, they can kind of get a sense of what they need to do by reading some of their peers' work. Sometimes, I want their original idea before they see everybody else. So I can set the Schoology site so they have to post a response before they can see all of the other ones. So it's a little flexible. I can also decide, do I want to just give them like participation credit? Yes, you answered the question, you replied to peers, you get online participation credit. Or do I want to go through and do I want to evaluate each of your posts? I do not do that every time because I am not crazy, okay? If I tried to put an A or a B or a C on every post online, I would be online all the time. For me, that's not where the value is, right? I use their work all the time in the classroom so they know I'm reading it. I do go through and I grade certain things that are a little bit more meaty or more, where I'm asking them to pull quotes from the text to support a statement. So it just depends. But as a teacher, you have those tools built right into Schoology, and you can decide what that looks like.